Mexico is a country with a long and rich history in art. Long before the Europeans came, at the beginnings of its history, the art of the Aztec and Mayan native peoples filled the landscape, mirroring the extraordinary physical beauty of the land itself. Filled with the most extraordinary vistas of mountains, volcanoes, lakes, and streams, Mexico excites the imagination and fills the senses. Surrounded by the history of their country, by pyramids and pyramid cities, by grand statues and monuments of civilizations now gone, by the rich legacy of pre-Columbian art and architecture, Mexico in the 20th century produced a group of giants in the visual fine arts, including Diego Rivera, David Siqueiros, and José Clemente Orozco. Considered by many to be the Paris of the second half of the 20th century, Mexico City, and Mexico in general, long had an important artistic community making many contributions to world art. These giants were Mexico to the world. But beneath their impressive presence was a growing world of unknown, highly talented artists for whom there seemed to be no avenue to express their work. Much like Paris in the 1920s, Mexico City in the 1950s began to attract the attention of American émigrés, those intellectuals and artists from the United States who were increasingly disaffected from and unhappy with the political and cultural directions that the United States was taking in its post-World War II new Cold War era. In the middle of the Hollywood blacklist, the emergence of TV sitcoms, and a seeming dearth of new talent in the visual arts, writers, painters, and artists of many varieties from all over the world began to see Mexico City as a new haven. Like many others of their generation, Bryna and David Prensky saw Mexico and Mexico City as such an attraction. Bryna Raskin Prensky was born in 1912 in New Jersey. From an early age, she was recognized as a talented artist and studied in many different fields, including dance, theater, and painting. By her early adulthood, she had settled upon painting as her means of primary expression and studied seriously in New York, first at the National Academy and later at the Art Students League under the great teacher, George Gross. In 1952, she married David Prensky, a dentist practicing in Miami, Florida, who was also a passionate supporter of the arts and with whom she was to spend the rest of her life. Having promised his bride a proper honeymoon which they had never taken, David and Bryna set out in 1954 on a road trip, an event so appropriate for that period of many famous road trips, and traveled through the South into Mexico, and finally, Mexico City. They were charmed by the people, the kindness and gentleness of the Mexicans, and by the country and terrain through which they moved. The faces and the landscape enthralled the painter in Bryna, and when they arrived in the Mexican capital some days later, they knew they were there to stay. Bryna again took up her brush and began to paint the people that she saw around her. In order to acquire a more natural affinity for the Mexico that she had adopted, she returned to her artistic studies, taking classes in painting, sculpture, and the history of Mexican art at the Academia de San Carlos, the premier Mexican art school. There she met dozens of young and aspiring artists who represented an enormous range of talents and potential in drawing, painting, and sculpture. But Mexican art had been and was dominated by the presence and then the memory of the three giants, and there was little room for support of these young and emerging artists and their work.
El apoyo lo tiene uno que buscar. El artista que de veras quiere triunfar, lo tiene que buscar por donde quiera los caminos hasta que logre. Porque el gobierno mexicano solamente da las becas cuando de veras ya tienen cierto prestigio. Y no se trata de esto, se trata de ayudarlos en el momento en que inicia la carrera para que puedan ya tener un poquito más de calma.
Bryna was deeply moved by the works being produced by these young people and by their aspirations and desires. She realized that without some strong support and some new venue for display of their work, this new movement in Mexico, and indeed an important contribution to world art, might well be lost. She was equally deeply moved by the young artists themselves and their need to find a way to support themselves as artists so that they might develop their talents to the fullest.
Cuando tuve contacto con la señora Prensky, con Bryna, recuperé una seguridad que había yo perdido cuando salí de la escuela. Tuve la suerte de ella ofrecerme una cantidad de dinero mensual para que yo pudiera seguir trabajando, para que yo pudiera pagar mi renta y los materiales. Y yo le entregaba obra a cambio de esa mensualidad. Si no tenía yo obra, de cualquier manera me daba la mensualidad. Y pues me emociona mucho la generosidad que tuvo conmigo. Yo quedé muy agradecido porque, vuelvo a repetir, en todo estaba pendiente.
With considerable sacrifice to herself, she set aside for the moment her own palette, brush, and easel, and with her husband David, she invested of their own time and limited resources in the opening of a new gallery on the Paseo de la Reforma, the Mexican Champs-Élysées, where the Galeria Bryna and Prensky home became a destination for visiting collectors and artists from all over the world. As in the Paris salons of the pre-war era, so the Galeria Bryna became a central point for a new generation of artists.
Era una cosa muy bella, muy bonita en el sentido de buena comprensión, de buena plática con los propios artistas, de comprensión hacia la obra. Y pues ella hizo en México una obra bellísima a la que siempre trató de impulsar a jóvenes artistas en los que sí estuvieron naturalmente dependiendo realmente de los consejos, de la sabiduría, de la sapiencia de la señora Bryna Prensky.
El principio de cualquier artista es vivir en el filo de la navaja, ¿no? Y entonces cuando se vive solo, pues se puede llevar los equilibrios más fácilmente. Cuando se lleva una familia sobre los hombros de uno, pues tiene uno que hacer más equilibrios que los normales, ¿no? Y entonces pues hubo muy buen momento en que conocí a la señora Bryna, conté con su apoyo tanto en la promoción de mi trabajo como en todos sentidos, y eso fue para mí fundamental. Ella era dueña de una galería, pero principalmente ella era una artista que entendía y que hablábamos el mismo idioma. Cuando ella hablaba de arte, comprendía los problemas de arte, y era muy diferente a lo que es un dealer que nada más promueve el arte, a un dealer que es artista y también promueve el arte. Y eso para una gente que va empezando joven como artista es muy importante, creo yo.
Over the next 20 years, Bryna actively collected and supported the work of her discoveries, as well as an increasing population of artists emerging in Mexico as significant contributors to the end of the century. Joining with them, she returned many times to her own painting to represent what she saw and felt in Mexico and its relationship to her own life. There were a number of exhibitions of her own work in other prominent galleries in Mexico. Yet throughout it all, she continued to show and support the artists for whom she became the principal sponsor. She collected the works of many artists who, under her guidance and tutelage, became famous throughout the world. Some became known only through her support of them. One such artist was Enrique Chavarria, a reclusive Mexican surrealist who died in 1998. Shy and seldom leaving home, he depended upon Bryna for encouragement and support. She collected virtually all of his work. Just before her death, Bryna brought the work of Chavarria to public attention with two significant one-man shows, first in the Mary Brogan Museum in Tallahassee, and then at the Florida International Museum in St. Petersburg. Her relationship with Chavarria is an important example of the nature of her life's work. Bryna's unique ability to contribute was summed up well in the St. Petersburg Times of December 11, 2002. Staff writer Lenny Bennett. Bryna's interest in Chavarria's work and willingness to show it to the public may unseal the door to the artist's hermetic life and career. 20 of Chavarria's paintings are on view at the Florida International Museum in a new exhibition, which was officially opened on Thursday by Governor Jeb Bush and Columba Bush. It was Columba who selected the Chavarria show to be the cultural component of the Gulf of Mexico States Accord 2002 annual conference, which met in St. Petersburg this week. The story of Enrique Chavarria and the almost 40-year friendship he shared with the Prenskys bears similarities to the lives of two famous artists, Vincent van Gogh, who died in similar obscurity, and Salvador Dali, who also had two generous patrons, Reynolds and Eleanor Morse, to help solidify his legacy with their comprehensive collection of his works, now housed in a museum in St. Petersburg. The Bryna collection is now housed in Palm Beach, Florida, and consists of more than 1,000 pieces from Mexican artists of the second part of the 20th century, whose careers were launched with substantial help from this remarkable woman and her husband. Some rose to fame, like the sculptor Francisco Zúñiga, who at the start treated the numerous drawings he made of his planned sculptures as works of no value, until a shocked Bryna Prensky rescued them and encouraged him to see them as works of art in their own right. Some of the artists have remained well known only in tight circles of devotees, and some have not yet been seen by a wide audience, such as Chavarria. The Bryna collection is a record, a snapshot, and a documentary of a period of creativity in the Americas which has no equal.
This is a very critical collection in the sense I am sure there is no other collection that exists that altogether covers this period of time. Whatever museums in this country hold Mexican art, I suspect after the very large names of Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera and so on, there isn't a great deal that represents the 60s, 70s, 80s from Mexico. So it's a very unique, a very valuable, and a superb collection. The entire collection needs to be placed somewhere where the world can, where the public can genuinely enjoy this and have an opportunity to see it on a regular basis.
Bryna Prensky died on November 18, 2002, 1 month before her 90th birthday. Bryna's untimely death and the realization that many of the contributors to this unique collection and the world of art in Mexico that it represents are also either dead, as are, for example, Chavarria and Zúñiga, or elderly or infirm, demand that we create a record and living history of the story of this collection, Mexico and the artistic period it represents, and the life of this dedicated woman who was able to bring it all together. The life and collection that Bryna left serve as a window on the amazing creativity of Mexican art in the 20th century, and a lesson in human creativity which knows no time, no century, and no country.